Welcome to Madre Patria África, the presence of Africa in Puerto Rico. For those of you who have been waiting patiently, thank you for waiting patiently. We were having some technical difficulty, but here we are now. So raise your hand if you love bomba. Bomba is an Afro-Puerto Rican music and dance tradition created in Puerto Rico in the 16th century. And right now it is all the rage. Anywhere you go on social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever, there are people in the diaspora and in Puerto Rico teaching, learning, and celebrating bomba. But I have a question for you. Even though we as Puerto Ricans and our friends who love our culture celebrate our Afro-Boricua traditions, how many of you know about our African ancestors or the motherland where they came from? Many people do, but many people do not. And that is the inspiration to this project and today's charla. Who were our ancestors before they were brought to Puerto Rico? And what are the traditions that are alive in Africa today? Well, this semester, we are taking a deep dive exploration into those questions. Today's live stream conversation and video premiere of The Prince and the Pana, our 21st original musical, starts a deep exploration into these questions. And the sun is shining on me. Yes, our ancestors are putting a spotlight on this charla today. So I hope you enjoy it. Over the next several months, our season celebration of Celebrando 2024 Heritage Project, Madre Patria África, will present a series of programs that will share relevant history to present day, cultural traditions, and more, through educational workshops, our upcoming interactive picnic, Ritmo y Baile, and our annual Salsa and Heritage Festival that I know you are all waiting for. And at the end of this broadcast, we're going to announce who our special guests for those events will be. But today, in today's live stream conversation, we will feature a highly energized discussion and review of the history of Africa in Puerto Rico with two very special guests who are Afro-Boricua historians, experts, presenters, humanities experts. You are just going to love it. And it's going to be in bilingual, Español y Inglés. You get to practice your Spanish or you get to practice your English. So today's special guests are Afro-Boricua historian and professor Dr. Pablo Luis Rivera from the University of Puerto Rico, and Melanie Maldonado, the founder and president of PROPA in Florida. So without further ado, let's start this charla. Feel free to share your comments in the chat. After we hear from both experts, we're going to have an open conversation. And again, we'll have a live stream of the Prince and the Pana, our 21st musical, after the charla. So Pablo, por favor, empiece la conversación. Y antes que tú empieces a hablar, dinos un poquito de su expertise como profesor.
Hola, saludos tanto a ti, Tekina, a Melanie, a David. Gracias, ¿verdad?, por la oportunidad de compartir esta experiencia con ustedes. Yo soy profesor en la Facultad de Estudios Generales en la Universidad de Puerto Rico, recinto de Río Piedras. También ofrezco cursos en la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales y parte de, ¿verdad?, de lo que hacemos lo voy a compartir. No me está permitiendo hacer compartir la presentación. Pero en mi caso, pues yo estoy ahí en la universidad, pero también fuera de lo que hacemos en ese proceso en el recinto, estamos también en un proyecto que atesoramos mucho, que se llama Afrolegado. y con Afrolegado pues realizamos intercambios, también realizamos trabajo académico de publicación, presentaciones y muchas actividades que van encaminadas al conocimiento de nuestra afrodescendencia. Es un proyecto que fundó mi esposa Yadilka Rodríguez y yo soy el co-director. Así que estoy tanto en la universidad como en las comunidades y en el trabajo de campo, ¿verdad? Que es un trabajo bastante arduo, pero que nos llena de muchas satisfacciones. Estoy aquí, ¿verdad? Para ver si me dan el acceso para poder transmitir y que puedan ver la presentación. A ver si Tekina me puede dar acceso.
So, yo creo que David ah, tiene que hacerlo
Vamos
porque
a
no
ver si.
tengo el botoncito. David,
Sí.
can you give him co-host access?
Ok, ahora. Trata.
Ahí está. Muchas gracias. Vamos a presentar para que puedan observar algunas imágenes que queremos proyectar. Voy a ir sobre ellas. Y hoy, ¿verdad? Desde la óptica de las grandes aportaciones de las personas afrodescendientes y de la afrodescendencia, y sobre todo el pensamiento negro, porque una de las cosas que precisamente nosotros trabajamos es el hecho de que veamos las aportaciones del continente africano, pero sobre todo rompiendo con esos esquemas que nos han inculcado y que hacen que veamos África como menor, ¿verdad? Como si fuera un país, no como un continente amplio. Y también otros aspectos de las aportaciones que están vinculadas a este asunto. Así que en el caso de la universidad, yo estoy coordinando una concentración menor en estudios e investigación transdisciplinaria en afrodescendencia, en una concentración menor en el bachillerato de estudios generales. Es parte de otras concentraciones que se están incorporando y para nosotros pues es sumamente importante que se logró incorporar esta concentración menor porque fue el esfuerzo de muchos años, de décadas, de personas que han defendido la afrodescendencia y la negritud y que sabían que no existía un espacio académico para traer oficialmente las discusiones. Así que se ha creado un currículo muy interesante y que lo que hace es precisamente abordar estos temas y crear lazos con otros espacios para continuar con este conocimiento de la afrodescendencia y la africanidad. Así que eso en cuanto a este proyecto. También tenemos el proyecto Afrolegado con el que hacemos desde clases a confinadas, difusión de distintos materiales, la clase de bomba con créditos en la universidad, conciertos, hacemos, ¿verdad? Mucho trabajo, especialmente para llegar a todos los confines. Aquí vemos, pues, un grupo, el grupo más reciente que graduamos de personas de edad avanzada y había dentro de ellos una persona de 104 años. Así que ha sido bien edificante lo que está sucediendo. Y estas fotos son del el intercambio que realizamos con la isla de Guadalupe, ¿verdad? Yo creo que Tekina tiene una experiencia amplia en los intercambios y nosotros, ¿verdad? Entendemos que eso es lo que enriquece todo lo que hacemos, ¿verdad? En términos generales. Y aquí, ¿verdad? Un reconocimiento que se nos hizo como embajadores internacionales de la cultura. Así que estamos, ¿verdad? Con Afrolegado haciendo distintas actividades, programas y proyectos que lo que hacen es precisamente enaltecer nuestra cultura, publicaciones que las más recientes, ¿verdad? Son la del Caño, Martín Peña, la de una visión caribeña de Puerto Rico a través de su historia y su cultura. Y ahora próximamente vamos a tener una sobre Don Tite Curet Alonso, el compositor. Así que en el tema de lo afro, nosotros nos enriquecemos con lo que nos han inculcado nuestros ancestros y personas involucradas en el tema de la africanidad. Y aquí algunos ejemplos de libros que tocan más específicamente el tema y que muchas veces no se conocen y no se estudian. Así que queríamos eso. En el caso de Puerto Rico, tenemos que entender que nos ha afectado a través de los siglos el colonialismo y hemos tenido una situación colonial de invasión, no solamente en el periodo español que transcurrió entre 1493 y 1898, y también el periodo actual, ¿verdad? A partir de 1898 hasta nuestros días, ¿verdad? Con el colonialismo estadounidense. Así que en el caso del colonialismo es una situación, ¿verdad?, en la cual un estado metrópoli controla un territorio. Así que basado en eso tenemos que ciertamente observar lo que ha pasado. Aquí están, ¿verdad?, los dos momentos coloniales que mencioné, y esto afirma un problema de deshumanización, especialmente con las personas afro y con las personas taínas, porque el colonialismo en principio lo que promovió fue conseguir, ¿verdad?, de parte de esos colonizadores españoles europeos, eh, satisfacer unos intereses, y esos intereses se satisfacían a cuenta de cualquier cosa. Y eso es importante mencionarlo porque eso incluyó diezmar nuestras poblaciones y hacer una exploración que culturizó el continente africano, ¿verdad? Secuestrando millones de personas en ese proceso para simplemente satisfacer unas necesidades. Así que lo hicieron de una manera que ciertamente no contemplaba la humanidad de estos seres humanos. Y esto estaba enmarcado ciertamente en el racismo, ¿verdad? Que es una ideología que defiende la superioridad de un grupo social sobre otro y promueve la discriminación y el aislamiento. Y en muchos casos se convierte en un crimen. Y ciertamente en el caso de Puerto Rico, pues vemos cómo este proceso fue un proceso bastante nefasto, y una de las cosas que no queremos es que nosotros reproduzcamos eso que sucedió y lo veamos como algo normal, ¿verdad? Que se normalice. En la medida que se normaliza, pues vemos esa realidad como algo que tenía que suceder y no sencillamente sucedió porque se estaban dando unos procesos que estaban enmarcados en el racismo. Así que en el caso de nosotros, como bien mencionó Tekina, estamos en un proceso de entender nuestra realidad y esos estudios que están enmarcados en la afrodescendencia. Y la afrodescendencia es un concepto conectivo que reconoce la herencia africana de la población negra que se da, ¿verdad? Se va dando en el continente africano y que se va transportando a otros lugares, ¿verdad? Y ahí nosotros recibimos ese valor, ¿verdad? Que se va incrementando en nuestras poblaciones con las aportaciones, el valor, la participación equitativa y activa, pero también un concepto, y esto es importante, que es político, que es estipulado en distintas actividades y encuentros impulsados por representantes de este amplio grupo y que reconoce la experiencia, retención y recuperación, que esto es importante, de espacios históricamente negados. Y eso es fundamental porque nuestras poblaciones se fueron ubicando en unos lugares y como bien conversábamos cuando nos conectamos, pues ciertamente se han ido moviendo, desplazando y hay que dar las luchas por rescatar esos espacios. Así que nosotros tenemos que reconocer que África es el continente más antiguo donde surge la humanidad y hay una familia de etnias, grupos, ¿verdad? Es el continente con la mayor diversidad cultural y nosotros hemos recibido el influjo de no solamente las personas que fueron esclavizadas, también de libres, de libertos, de cimarrones y dentro de el grupo de personas que llegaban a nuestras costas, pues también ladinos y bozales, ladinos que eran los que primero se llevaban a la península ibérica y adquirían las costumbres, ¿verdad? Se aculturaban allí en la península, otros los transportaban hacia América, así que entendían el devenir de ese colonizador o de ese amo o de esa persona que esclavizaba y tendían a conspirar, tendían a levantarse y aquí es interesante porque entonces se tomó la medida de secuestrar bozales, que bozales eran las personas que se secuestraban directamente de África con la intención que no pudieran comunicarse o fuera más complicado la comunicación. Aunque tenemos que reconocer que el continente africano se destaca porque las personas son políglotas, tienden a tener una gran facilidad de hablar 3 idiomas o más. Así que esas migraciones que se van dando a través de todo este proceso, ¿verdad? En un proceso triangular, ¿verdad? De África hacia Europa, de Europa hacia América, de África hacia América, ciertamente nutrió nuestro entorno cultural. Así que eso impactó también nuestras comunidades, nuestras personas, tanto con ese cimarronaje como con los procesos que se van dando a raíz, especialmente de ese inicio que se da para conquistar la costa africana. Las costas africanas se empiezan a explorar por los portugueses y se fueron adentrando en el continente, ¿verdad? Se da una penetración en el continente que en el caso de uno de los lugares más importantes que penetran, el Congo, después del 1350, ¿verdad? Fue fundado por el rey Nimilukeni del pueblo Congo o Congo, y este reino se extendía al norte y sur de la desembocadura del río Congo sobre 300.000 kilómetros cuadrados y tenía una población de unos 3 millones de habitantes, así que, para que lo puedan ver en inglés, estos, ¿verdad? Son imágenes que recreaban con lo que se encontraban los europeos, que eran tierras de grandes reinos e imperios, ¿verdad? Todo lo contrario a lo que nos tratan de inculcar, ¿verdad? De que África era un lugar inhóspito, ¿verdad? Que es una de las palabras que se utilizan, que era una gran selva, y ciertamente África tiene grandes selvas, pero lo más que abundan son las sabanas, luego los desiertos y luego las selvas. Así que aquí, ¿verdad? Tenemos algunos de esos reinos que muy bien, ¿verdad? Luego podemos entrar en el detalle, pero en el norte tenemos ejemplo el de Egipto, el de Cartago, el de Nubia, en el centro, ¿verdad? Los de Ghana, Mali, Songhai, el Ashanti, el Dahomey, el Yoruba, el de Benin, y en el sur, ¿verdad? Vemos el Apsun, el Zulu y el de Zimbabue. Así que más allá de lo que nos pintan, tenemos, ¿verdad? En África, incluso hasta esta figura que vemos aquí, que muy poco se discute, sin embargo, si uno lo busca, es la figura que se reconoce como la persona más acaudalada, con más dinero a través del tiempo, ¿verdad? En la humanidad, que es el Mansa Musa, que tenía un séquito de 60.000 hombres, que devaluó el precio del oro porque lo regalaba, en fin, ¿verdad? Muchos aspectos que demuestran cómo era ese proceso que se daba en África antes de esa colonización que inician los portugueses y que luego siguen, ¿verdad? Otros grupos europeos penetrando y saqueando lo que pasaba allí y martirizando a estas personas, ¿verdad? Así que ahí vemos cómo se da ese colonialismo. España, Italia, Francia, Reino Unido, Alemania, Portugal, Bélgica. Es difícil sobrevivir a algo así. Y lo que sucedió, ¿verdad? Fue un proceso de deculturación, y ese proceso de deculturación básicamente lo que hizo fue que por razones de explotación y para desarraigar la cultura, ¿verdad? Con el interés de enriquecerse, pues se explotó el continente. Quería, ¿verdad? Que viéramos que fue devastador lo que sucedió eh, eh, en el continente africano, tal como pasó aquí en Puerto Rico. Esos primeros años, los colonizadores arrasaron con las poblaciones. Por lo tanto, yo creo que esto es una mirada a lo que realmente sucedió, y más allá de seguir mirando desde el punto de vista del colonizador, ¿verdad? La persona que oprime, tenemos que ver desde el oprimido, porque ciertamente una de las cosas que sucedió es que después de esta devastación estamos todavía hoy con un currículo y una mirada eurocéntrica, y todavía reconociendo a estas personas como héroes, y ciertamente la historia fue muy distinta. Así que, ¿verdad? Para que vean dentro de y con relación a la discusión, ciertamente uno de los pueblos que tenemos que llamar a la atención es el pueblo de San Mateo de Cangrejos, por la importancia que tuvo en el proceso de reconocimiento de esa africanidad, de esa afrodescendencia, siendo un pueblo fundado por personas negras, y que todavía hoy lucha por mantener vivas esas tradiciones, esa herencia que es tan importante. Así que juega un papel fundamental, porque allí se daba el cimarronaje puro, que es una respuesta directa a los gobiernos que nos dominaron y que arrasaron con el país. Sin embargo, aquí llegaban personas que en su mayoría escapaban de potencias enemigas de España, y se le daban tierras y se ubicaban. Y el resultado y el producto de esto es que en San Mateo de Cangrejo, hoy día Santurce, tenemos el ejemplo vivo de la afrodescendencia en su máxima expresión. Quiero traer a colación, ¿verdad? Por la cuestión de tiempo, que incluso figuras que reconocemos como los padres de la patria, ¿verdad? Y ahí tenemos al que se reconoce como el padre de la patria, era negro. Ramón Emeterio Betances no solamente era negro, en la línea, ¿verdad? Que más adelante va a discutir Melanie Maldonado. Yo creo que la genealogía juega un papel importante, y en el caso de Ramón Emeterio Betances, su papá se hizo una limpieza de sangre, una práctica que en el pasado se hacía en la Iglesia Católica, donde una persona podía comprar el que lo transportaran del libro de los negros, pardos, morenos de la iglesia al libro de los blancos. Y su papá hizo eso. Y Betances siempre renegó de ese proceso. Así que él reconocía ampliamente su negritud. Si reconocemos a Betances entonces como el padre de la patria, las bases y el sustento de nuestra afrodescendencia están ahí, ¿verdad? Desde las personas que se reconocen como los padres de la patria puertorriqueña. Así que el antillano es un ejemplo de muchos otros, ¿verdad? Que están vinculados a lo que es nuestro proceso de formación y de reconocimiento de nuestra identidad como pueblo. Así que quiero, para darle el espacio a Melanie y a la actividad, ¿verdad? Y cumplir con el tiempo, finalizar con este pensamiento que para mí es fundamental y que recoge lo que Tekina con esta actividad menciona. Voy a... Denme un segundito para que lo puedan observar. Aquí está.
Pues muchas
Y
gracias, Pablo. ¿Terminaste o no?
deme un minutito para
Okay,
leer este pensamiento y con este cerramos.
okay, super.
Ok. Y el pensamiento lee de la siguiente forma. Finalmente hoy día en Puerto Rico no podemos negar la presencia africana en todas partes, especialmente en el pensamiento, en la intelectualidad. Aunque hay mucho camino por recorrer, promovemos el que siga vivo el pensamiento decolonial, la educación participativa, las interseccionalidades, la visibilidad, la sawabona, el Ubuntu y todas las cosas maravillosas que nos ha legado el continente africano, la madre África. Erradiquemos de una vez y por todas el racismo y aportemos, ¿verdad?, a esa integración que es tan importante y conozcamos nuestra historia. Eso es lo que va a enriquecer y fortalecer nuestra identidad. Muchas gracias, Tekina. Muchas gracias, Melanie. Muchas gracias, David.
Pues muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Pablo, por todo esto. You know, it's wonderful to get so much history, and it's just a small resume, ¿verdad? So if you have preguntas, something you want to know, another detail, put your question in the comments. And after this charla, we will be having an open discussion. And yeah, before we introduce Melanie, I wanted to also thank David, my husband, who's really the magician working the live stream in the background, and he worked very hard for us to be here today. So, but anyway, without further ado, we're going to continue with this fascinating conversation about Madre Patria África, the presence of Africa in Puerto Rico, with Melanie Maldonado, who is the founder and president of PROPA. And with that introduction, I'm hardly saying anything about who this wonderful woman is. So before you start your discussion, please tell us a little more about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to be speaking in English today. Thank you, Pablo. It was a really wonderful introduction. And to this time, to this session, to the whole afternoon, really, with this, the program, really dense material, so much to cover in such a little bit of time. But I think you did a really wonderful job of giving an overview of our roots on the mother continent. My name is Melanie Maldonado Diaz. I am the founder and president of PROPA, Puerto Rican Organization for the Performing Arts, which is in its 20th fiscal year. Really excited about that program and the organization, really, and having just transitioned it from a grassroots project for 20 years into an official 501c3. And so we're happy to be here collaborating here with Tekina, with David, with the Puerto Rican Cultural Center in Austin, Texas, and with Dr. Pablo Rivera. Today, I'm here to talk to you about my research related to the African presence in Puerto Rico through a couple of means. One, as a genealogist, I work directly with families, with individuals, with communities to look for those ties that connect us not only to each other, to legacies, but also to the mother continent and to other ancestors, including our First Nations ancestors, the Taino and the Arcaicos, among others, in Boriquen. I'm going to talk to you today as well about one of the ships that brought the largest number of captive people from the mother continent. And you heard Pablo introduce the information regarding the density of people who originated from the Congo in Puerto Rico or in Boriquen. I'm going to share my screen now. And let's see. All right. So today we're talking about the Majesty, which is that very ship that I just mentioned. It was the last illegal slave ship to be captured, the last illegal slave ship known to be captured on the coast around in the waters of Boriquen, of Puerto Rico. And it left what is today the Angolan coast of Central Africa with a cargo of over 1,000 people who had been captured in the area of the Congo River. I want to show you just the map there. So you saw some of the maps that Pablo showed, some of the statistics related to forced migration through the system of enslavement throughout the transatlantic slave trade. Here you see a very specific a map specific to the area that reflects the people who were on board the Majesty. So the Majesty left this coast in July of 1858 and made its way to the Caribbean. Most reports indicate that it was headed to Cuba. It, in fact, shipwrecked off the coast of Puerto Rico. And as we understand it, because they had arrived in the wrong place and had shipwrecked, they quickly began trying to sell some of the captives aboard to recoup their costs, understanding that they would soon be caught. And so what we understand is that in that trip from Central Africa to the Caribbean, more than 100 people died in that journey. Once they shipwrecked and quickly made a plan to recuperate their costs, we understand that over 300 people were sold to plantations in that area, in the area of Humacao, where the boat ran aground in shallow water. Within about 3 weeks, the ship was overtaken by the Spanish colonial government. And because the transatlantic slave trade itself with direct importation from Africa was illegal by this time, the boat was seized. The captives were seized and taken to the metropolitan area where they were processed. And can you imagine what that is like to, one, be captured, two, to be stolen from your family, your homeland, three, to be taken on this just frightening voyage, and then four, to arrive only to be told that you're free and not have a way to actually get back home. What we understand from the work of different scholars, but principally Dr. Miguel Correa, who I'll show you a picture of shortly, is that you can see here on this map where Humacao is. But the boat ran aground right here off the coast of Humacao in southeastern Puerto Rico, off the main island. And because of the work of Dr. Miguel Correa, we understand that the ship ran aground right near a bay that is now the coastal area of Palmas del Mar, a very posh community, a planned community that has resorts and high wealth living. So Dr. Miguel Correa, may he rest in peace. He recently passed, but one of the contributions he made to our history is a book called Presencia Africana en Humacao, 1859. So the African presence in Humacao, 1859. And he wrote this book to detail his research, the research that he compiled about the Majesty. And so last summer we had a chance to sit down with Dr. Correa, hear from him about his research about this location and the implications for the arrival of that ship to his community in Humacao. We then, let me just skip back here for a second. You can see that we organized in collaboration with the Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project. PROPA began a collaboration with this organization based in Florida, but working throughout the continental United States up until 2023. We began collaborating with this organization, with its staff and board in 2023, and PROPA became the first project outside of the contiguous 48 states to work with this organization to highlight this history of arrival directly from Africa to the United States and its territories / its colonies, just to use a more appropriate word. So in working with this organization, we were able to use the research provided by Dr. Correa and organize some of our collaborators, some of the folks that I have worked with through genealogy, to create a ceremony that would honor the ancestors who were aboard that ship, who had been brought to the main island through this voyage by force, through the process of enslavement. We considered they were captives, really. About 300 of them were actually enslaved. The others, as I mentioned, were considered emancipated upon arrival. So at Punta Santiago, which is an area along the Humacao coast, along the northern part of the coast, we held an interfaith ceremony that included several elements of African faith practices that would have been represented on that ship or would have been represented by the African and Afro-descendant population already on the island. In addition, we had a land acknowledgement, which was provided by the United Confederation of Taino People. So if you remember, I mentioned that the ship left the Angolan coast. So we had Mr. Kojo Johnson, who with his project Ritmo Resiliente included, provided, presented, the participation of an ancestral instrument from Angola, which is the berimbau. And the berimbau, as he has explained to me and to our team, the berimbau is used to open a space for ancestors, to invite them. And so as the ceremony began, the berimbau was played as people arrived. We had a wonderful land acknowledgement. And then we moved on to have other faith elements, including blessings and libations we had a Babalao who in representation of Ifa from Nigeria. We had a Nana from representing the Bono medicine of rural Ghana. and we had a tata representing the practices of Palomayombe and therefore Congolese traditions. We also felt it was very important to include the practices of the African diaspora in Puerto Rico. And so we had an espiritista who also explained how her practices, how espiritismo is rooted in African faith traditions. In that effort, we were acknowledging those ancestors aboard the ship. We were honoring them and their descendants. As you continue to learn about the Majesty, I encourage you to read an article we had that was written by Dr. Jorge Chinea. His article is called Slavery and Child Trafficking in Puerto Rico at the Closing of the African Slave Trade, the Young Captives of the Slaver Majesty, 1859 to 1865. I understand that this production that I'm really looking forward to seeing involves some of this history, reflects some of this history, and I think Dr. Chinea's article will help provide some context, in particular to the children who were aboard the Majesty. What we understand was a large number of the total captives. Another element in the ceremony that we held to honor those captives was to connect through genealogy some current living contemporary people who had an ancestral connection to the ship, that 6th degree of separation that you hear about. And so as the person who has worked very closely with the Cepeda Brenes family of practitioners of different Afro-descendant traditions in Puerto Rico, I already knew that one of the people along the Brenes line had been enslaved by an enslaver in Humacao by the last name of Lusunaris. What I learned in my research related to the Majesty is that an enslaver by the last name of Lusunaris in Humacao was one of the people that requested the emancipated. Now, if you remember, I said that the emancipated were taken to the metro area, the metropolitan area, where they were processed, where they were enumerated, basically. And a general call was made to the island that said, hey, are there any plantation owners who need workers? Well, basically what the colonial Spanish government was doing was creating a legal system of slavery that resulted in indentured servants. And so these newly emancipated people who had been former captives on the ship were now legally indentured. And so another thing that I learned in the process, or I was able to divulge in this ceremony, was that yet another person, another family that I'd worked on through my genealogy, a board member actually of PROPA, who had been in a series that I have called Africa Habla en Mí, which is a genealogy series. Her family has a direct connection. Some of her ancestors had been enslaved by some of the enslavers in the area of what is today known as Carolina. And one of these enslavers to whom she had this direct connection is a person who was one of the plantation owners that said, hey, I need workers. And so through genealogy, we were able to connect living people to this very grotesque and painful experience on the island. And we're able to say, these are the descendant communities. These are the people that represent the ancestors. That we have living faces, living people that we can connect to this atrocious history. Their families' histories were forever marked. Their forward stories were forever marked by this and other experiences during the transatlantic slave trade. So in that process of sharing their genealogies at the beach, we were able to ask the two youngest members of the Cepeda Brenes family, two of the children, to be the first to help us release flowers to honor the ancestors who passed who did not survive the journey. And you can see there in the middle image, we had an original number that was written by friend Marcos Peñalosa Pica that told this story in a very succinct way. I also encourage you to read an article by Professor Dr. Luis Burset. His article is called Los Africanos Emancipados del Majesty, el contrabando de esclavos frente a la prohibición de la trata en Puerto Rico, 1859. So these two professors provided a lecture for us that allowed us to get to know their work, their research, and the children who were on the Majesty, and then the people who were considered emancipated upon arrival, who were on the ship when the ship was captured by the Spanish colonial government. We then went to, we learned in these texts also, and in this history, that there were 79 Africans who were recorded as having been interred or buried in Humacao within the first few weeks of the ship's arrival. And so we went to the Cementerio Histórico de Humacao, the historic cemetery of Humacao, which was not yet open, but it served as a place for us to hold a remembrance ceremony in honor of these 79 Africans who were aboard the Majesty, who came from the area of the Congo River, and who, according to church records, were buried in la orilla del cementerio. So you can see in the bottom right photograph, I'm laying flowers right there at the edge of the cemetery, symbolically, because the cemetery that they were actually buried in no longer exists. You can see here the berimbau greeted people, received people, and it also helped usher people out. We actually said the names of each and every of those 79 Africans. We have some of those original African names through archival material, and you'll see some of those names in the articles that I mentioned. We also have the names that were imposed upon them, and we were able to read their the given names, their birth names, and the names that they were buried with. We had a beautiful Belén by Alex Lasalle, bombero from New York, and you can see the large crowd that gathered to help us honor these Africans. Moving right along, I'm going to move us right now into genealogy, because it's important for us to understand how we are connected. So many of us were taught this really erroneous narrative about our ancestral mixture, and that it's Taino, Spaniard, and African. And the truth is that's confusing and equating an ethnic group with a country, with a continent. And it's false and erroneous and reductive, and it really doesn't even include all of the other people that were brought, including other First Nations groups that were brought from throughout the Americas to Boricán, and other groups that migrated voluntarily. Here you can see through this genealogy project called Africa Habla en Mí. Back a few years ago, I was able to detail some of the specific ethnic groups that my project has begun to map in Puerto Rico. You can see at the very bottom, right where Humacao is actually, you can see Mende from Sierra Leone, and that is the Brenes family. Through that Brenes Lusunaris line, you can see Tata Cepeda there in the middle photograph with me, and then right below her, you can see her daughter, Barbara, with me. Right next to Barbara, we have Don Jesus Cepeda Brenes, and then at the bottom right-hand photograph, you see Julia Cepeda, daughter of Don Jesus. So their maternal line we tested, and the company that we used identified the Mende people of Sierra Leone. In the right-hand top corner, we have Doña Wilda from Patillas, and in the photograph right below that with Julia, we see Doña Wilda's nephew, and he helped us test, and the testing company we used helped identify that their paternal line, Doña Wilda's paternal line, and her nephew is a direct male descendant of a line that goes back to the Yoruba of Nigeria. And you can see that little arrow pointing to Patillas. Next to that, we have the Brame of Guinea-Bissau. And that line is represented by Doña Marta, which is the upper left-hand photograph, Doña Marta of Guayama. In that photograph right below with Don Jesus is Doña Marta's grandson. And so their maternal line through Doña Marta's mother, who was Julia Clavel, who's known affectionately in the Bomba community as Julia Clavel, and in another video referred to as Ernesta Villodas, whose mother was Salome Villodas, whose mother was Nicolasa Villodas, whose mother was Maria Inés, born in Africa. And so that maternal line, through DNA testing, we were able to identify as descending from the Brame of Guinea-Bissau. So all of these 3 countries so far in West Africa, and going back to the captives of the Majesty, we know that the Congo people from the Congo are from Central Africa. So just to make that distinction. At the very top, we have Urhobo from Nigeria, which is another ethnic group, a much smaller ethnic group in the Delta state of Nigeria. And that actually is connected to my ancestry. And so I have connected with a living DNA cousin who was born in Africa, who is of the Urhobo people. And I am have spent the last few years learning about the Urhobo people, their traditions, their culture. And I'm looking forward to helping with the local Urhobo Progress Union of Central Florida, hosting the National Urhobo Convention, which will be here in Orlando later this year. Just moving right along, a couple more slides. So I thank you for your patience. One of the things that's important to test when you're looking at DNA testing, there are a couple different kinds of tests. If you're a woman, you can test. If you're a biological woman, you are XX. You have the X and X chromosome, the X chromosome, period. And we can only test our direct maternal line. We can also conduct what's called an autosomal test. And in autosomal testing, that is the center image that you see in this slide that gives you what most people want to know. I'm 17% that, 43% that, 2% this. Testing the direct maternal or paternal line, so men are XY, they can test both the mother and the maternal and paternal line, will tell you what is the oldest DNA group that particular line descends from. And so you can see the maternal line is called mitochondrial DNA or maternal DNA. The Y line or the male line, you'll see words as paternal line, the Patrick clan, you'll see these words. What's really important genealogically is that you are whatever your mother's line was. And so that becomes important because as geneticists are conducting testing, they really are only looking at the maternal line as they are looking at population groups globally. And this is a wonderful slide that you can see the reference for at the bottom of the slide. So a very critical genetic study was conducted over 2 decades ago out of the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, by Professor Martinez Cruzado. And he tested that maternal line, the mitochondrial DNA of present-day people in Borican in Puerto Rico. It found that 61.3% of people had an Amerindian or a First Nations matrilineal or maternal DNA line. 52%, more than half of those, had haplogroup A. And I know if this person will volunteer, they'll talk about their DNA, but I can tell you that my maternal haplogroup is haplogroup A. 61% of people on the island have a First Nations a maternal haplogroup. Half of them have a maternal haplogroup of A that begins with the letter A. What does that mean? Most A is primarily associated with the archaicos, or the archaics in English, who are considered the pre-Tainos and are genetically linked to First Nations groups in North America. The Tainos, or the Taino bloodlines, primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, you will see a C haplogroup. And they, as is widely known, descend from people in the Amazon. So moving on, because this is what's important to today's presentation, is that 27.2, more than 1/4% of people in Boriquen have an African maternal haplogroup. Now, if you just add those numbers, that's more than 88% of people from Boriquen have an Afro-Taino lineage. One or the other, for the most part, almost everybody who does the autosomal testing will see a percentage of some kind of African and some kind of First Nations group. Almost always, initially, it'll say like Indigenous Puerto Rico. They don't identify whether it's Taino, Arcaico, or another group, but then you might see other Indigenous groups. And we talked about how First Nations people were brought to Boriquen during the period of enslavement. And then 11.5. I think that that's probably very surprising for people to learn that only 11.5% of people have a European maternal haplogroup. This is a very useful, and this is my last slide. This is a very useful graphic because it helps us break down that 27.2% African haplogroup. So if you look at Puerto Rico or Boriquen, it's the pie chart that is all the way to the right at the bottom of the screen. So you can see those breakdowns that I just provided, 61.3%, 11.5%, and the one that we're most interested in is that 27.2%. Why does our DNA profile as a country look so different than the rest of the Caribbean? Well, we'll have to save that for another presentation, but it has everything to do with cédulas. So, real cédulas, la cédula de gracias de 1815. These are these invitations by the Spanish colonial government to help populate the island. Initially in 1800, more than half the island was Afro-descendiente. But the cédula de gracias of 1815 was targeted specifically to white Europeans to help create a rupture in the large number of people who were visibly Afro-descendiente. So that is why our islands or our archipelago's DNA profile looks so different from the other large Antilles. I'm going to end here. I hope that this has been helpful in understanding our history, our understanding, our knowledge of the Majesty, who was aboard, where they ended up throughout the archipelago, in what circumstance did they find themselves, what the faces of people who are somewhat connected to this ship look like today, and how we connect to the mother continent through our DNA.
Thank you, Melanie. That was wonderful. And I take the bait. I will say that I really enjoyed all of it, but especially the genealogy. People who know me know that I'm fiercely Taino. And I had the blessing of having my mitochondrial DNA tested by Cruzado himself almost 15 years ago. My mother said, what is the question? But it was fascinating to do it, not only so that I could have a piece of paper to prove that I'm Taino, just in case that's useful to us as a people in the future, but I learned that I was from the haplogroup A1, which is los primeros de los primeros arcaicos, that they say, the research said they came from the Yucatan over to Puerto Rico. And that told me why I ended up right here doing what I do, because my family has been part of Puerto Rico for 6,000 years. Your DNA calls. So, well, thank you, all of you. And so we have time for a couple of questions. Tenemos tiempo para preguntas. Yo tengo dos preguntas aquí. And if anybody else has questions, put them down in the chat. So the first question comes from Raul Ayala, from Los Hermanos Ayala, from Luisa. Hello, Raul. Thank you for being part of this. And of course, he's asking this question to bring visibility, not because he doesn't know the answer. He wants to know, ¿dónde ubicas a Luisa en la tema que acabas de explicar?
Ciertamente, como sabemos, Loíza juega un papel fundamental en términos de las tradiciones, ¿verdad? Y de la afrodescendencia. Se ha convertido en un lugar importantísimo en ese sentido, especialmente porque tiene una población afro que quizás es la más amplia en todo Puerto Rico. Sin embargo, a mí me parece que una de las cosas que tenemos que lograr en el país es que, más allá de los pueblos como Loíza, que sabemos que tienen una afrodescendencia indiscutible, que otros pueblos que no reconocen su afrodescendencia, pues tengan ese espacio para también entrar en esa discusión. Por ejemplo, Carolina, yo soy de Carolina, y a través del tiempo se ha tratado de blanquear el pueblo de Carolina, a pesar de que la mayor parte de la población es afro. Pero está en lugares que no son visiblemente establecidos, ¿verdad? Como por ejemplo el campo, Cacao, Barraza, de donde yo soy natural, San Antón. Me parece que todo esto lo que trae ciertamente es una discusión importante, no solamente de mirar a los pueblos que tienen evidentemente esa afrodescendencia, sino también a los que no la presentan como parte de su desarrollo social.
I would just also add that, and thank you so much, Don Raúl. Such a pleasure to have you joining us today. There is so much opportunity to learn still. We have so much opportunity, so much to learn. We do know, as Pablo just shared, that Loíza has such a rich history of cultural tradition, of preservation, of pointing us back to Africa at every opportunity. And so Loíza stands as a beacon for Africa in Puerto Rico, for sure, without a doubt. And while we know that there were people, Afrodescendientes, whether they were enslaved or whether they were free throughout the island, not just on the coast, as the colonial narrative tells us, but we know that they were, Afrodescendientes were throughout the island, that they were the predominant group in 1800, which is what precipitated the Cédula de Gracias. But Loíza has always been and continues to be a beacon, a representation of, or a microcosm of Africa in Boriquen.
Thank you for both for those words of wisdom. So here's another question, and this might be an explosive one. I hear people say, oh, but the past is the past, el pasado es el pasado, ¿por qué dan tanto importancia en el pasado? So the question is, why is it important for someone to know about their ancestral history, to know about their ancestral roots? What does it do for them? ¿Por qué es importante para una persona conocer sus raíces ancestrales y su historia? ¿Por qué?
Ciertamente, si nosotros no conocemos nuestro pasado, no vamos a entender nuestro presente y no vamos a poder forjar un futuro. El pasado es fundamental y rescatar eso, especialmente cuando trabajamos con géneros como la bomba, que juega lo que es la tradición oral un papel tan importante, ¿verdad? No sería lo que es si no se desarrolla ese fundamento que viene del pasado. Me parece que la historia es la zapata del país, es el cimiento del país. Si nosotros no conocemos el pasado, no vamos a estar perdidos en el presente y no vamos a poder establecer un buen futuro. Así que yo creo que es indispensable conocer el pasado.
I mean, such an important statement that Pablo just made. The truth is, colonialism has robbed us of so much. Enslavement has robbed us of so much. All that is imperialism has robbed us of so much. From our First Nations ancestors, from our Taíno and Arcaico ancestors, to other ancestors from Africa, from throughout the continent. I've worked one family that we were able to find some information that potentially seems to lead to South Africa. In Boriquén, in Arroyo. We have this process of genealogy, this process of understanding who all speaks through our DNA, who all speaks through through what it is that composes who we are is important, because then we really begin to understand those nuances about ourselves. We get to understand why our families lived in places like Cayo Los Congo and Patillas, why our families grew up maybe eating maize dishes, right? Because corn was pre-Columbian in Boriquén. And maybe some families have traditions that are directly linked to a gastronomy that comes to us through our Taino ancestors. Learning these things helps decode those mysteries that maybe they're not even mysteries, but when in retrospect, then they become mysteries, because how did I not know all this time that I was living an African tradition right here in Puerto Rico or in the Puerto Rican diaspora? How is it that I didn't know all these years that when I say un chin, that I'm actually speaking Taino? How is it that I didn't know these things? So the study of our ancestors, conducting genealogy, helps decode all of this. And I know that the mitochondrial DNA can be a little bit confusing. This is the oldest DNA along the maternal line. And geneticists group us based on our maternal DNA. So I know that that may not be a popular idea, but it's just a genetic fact, is that we are grouped according to our maternal line. And this doesn't mean that we are 61% First Nations or Indigenous or Native Boriquén. What it means is that 61% of people have a First Nations maternal line in the archipelago.
Thank you. And I will add, not only do I agree with everything they said, but also understanding your ancestral roots helps you understand who you are. And so one story is, if you come to my house, you'll see my desk is full of maracas and shells that I've collected my whole life. I have a dozen maracas around me, and I have a desk full of shells. And I remember being young and people telling me, why are you collecting shells? They're bad luck. And I would be like, you know, touch my shells and I'll kill you, right? Because these things meant so much to me. And now, as I'm understanding more about my herencia taína, I'm understanding that this is a sacred instrument this is a sacred instrument. No wonder I, without control, are always collecting it and have been collecting it in my whole life. And so understanding your ancestral roots helps you understand who you are. And so, all right. With that, I think that we're going to go on to see our film. But I want to say first, thank you to Melanie and Professor Pablo. I knew that you guys would blow up this conversation. I'm sure that there are people out there whose soul is screaming to learn more. And so these people are easily foundable on Facebook, and you can reach out to them to learn more. And also our Celebrando Heritage project is continuing. This is just the opening level set of the Presencia of Africa in Puerto Rico. Celebrando 2024 is a project that has been in the plan for the last year and a half, and it will continue with a deeper understanding of Africa, the motherland, and the people of Africa today, so that we can understand not only our descendants, but the people who are Africa today. So maybe you'll discover something about yourself that you realize came from this herencia, right? So we will be continuing with workshops and our interactive picnic that everyone loves, our annual picnic, Picnic Ritmo y Baile, and our annual Salsa and Heritage Festival. They're all dedicated to a cultural exchange of Puerto Rico and Africa. And so if you stay to the end of this broadcast, you will be the first to know who are our special guests that we're bringing. We are bringing for these projects Tata Cepeda, representing the Familia Cepeda, and she's coming with 3 generations of Cepeda family members. So the Cepeda family members were my first teachers of folklore in Puerto Rico, not just bomba, but all of Puerto Rican folklore. And so I am richly indebted to this family that I consider part of my own family. And also for the contribution of Africa and the learning of Africa, we're going to be working with Lanaya, West African Drum and Dance. They are a nonprofit cultural arts group here in Austin, and they are bringing their maestros directly from Africa to join us on this project. We are so excited. We've been planning this for a year and a half. And so very soon I will be releasing invitations with more information. So watch out for those announcements. But right now we're going to enjoy the live stream video premiere of The Prince and the Pana. It was a play, an original play that I wrote, and it was very much inspired by, first of all, I want to give credit to Lester Nursey of Cangrejos. A couple of years ago, Pablo and Pablo introduced me to him. We had coffee in Santurce, and he said a phrase with such passion, Madre Patria África. And that phrase resounded in my heart because I had never heard that phrase before. I always heard of, Madre Patria España, which, as a Taíno, that doesn't do anything for me. But when I heard this is Madre Patria África, it opened my eyes to the fact that I wanted to learn more, how little I knew. And then also this play was inspired not only from the basic history, but also last year, Melanie Maldonado was starting her plaque commemoration of the Majesty and the Humacao, and reaching out to organizations such as my own, asking for support so that you can petition this. And I said, what? There were children on those ships? I mean, that pierced my heart as a mother. That pierced my heart. And then listening to a follow-on live stream that Melanie had, that she invited these historians of those articles that she talked about. And I learned one fact, that some of those children were taken from their homeland at such a young age. And by the time they got carted around and landed in the Caribbean, they couldn't even remember who they were, where their home was, what their name was. I mean, something like that just pierced my heart. And of course, I said, I'm going to have to write a play so that everybody can learn about this. And so without further ado, we're going to live stream The Prince and the Pana. It's a play that was set in the mid-19th century before the abolition of slavery in Puerto Rico. And this play follows an African prince who was kidnapped from Africa and brought to Puerto Rico, and he managed to escape. And this play is about his journey to save his people. After he escaped, he went into the mountains to have a foothold where he can try to find his people, and he couldn't find them, but instead he found the children of the Majesty. And so I'll give you a tip at the end of the play, he rescues them. And so that's exciting. But also, this play, since he was in the mountains, very conveniently, Tekina was able to add some history of the Jibaro people from of that century who inherited Taino traditions. People may not realize that a lot of, like the word ching ching is a Taino word. There's so many traditions that Puerto Ricans have, especially the Puerto Ricans from the mountains, that if you know what you're looking for, those are Taino traditions. And we expose that in the play, in addition to this wonderful history about the Prince and the Pana. So before we take a little break and go off to see this video, I want to thank the sponsors who made this project possible. And that includes Six Square, which is the East Austin Black Cultural District here in Austin that supports us. We're so grateful for you guys. Houston Tillerson University, who supported us with the play and the theater. You're going to see the play. It's in a beautiful theater, and it was thanks to Houston Tillerson University. Also, the Texas Commission on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the City of Austin Economic Development Division, and Humanities Texas, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So there are a lot of beautiful, serious agencies that say, yes, Tekina-eiru, the quality of your work deserves these little gold stars. And last but not least, the Instituto de Cultura, who named us the ambassador of Puerto Rican culture in Texas and the Southwest in 2005. We're grateful for your ongoing love and support. So thank you all. Do any of you guys want to say any parting words?
Gracias, Tekina, por la invitación. Gracias a Melanie por esa información tan valiosa y a ese público que se conectó, ¿verdad? Que yo sé que va a seguir disfrutando de lo que van a presentar. Así que gracias y reafirmemos nuestra identidad. Pablo Luis Rivera, Universidad de Puerto Rico y Afrolegado. Muchas gracias.
And thank you so much. It's just, again, it's just so wonderful to be in conversation with you, Pablo, and grateful always for the opportunity to highlight our ancestors, to name them, to create space so that their stories are not lost, and to help remember their legacies together. I will say that on May 4th, we are holding our next ceremony. So it hasn't even been published yet. So this weekend is the first time we're announcing it publicly. But on May 4th, in collaboration with the Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project, and I see we have a representative from the organization, and Cobb, founder and our executive director, excuse me, of the organization, will be holding another ceremony on May 4th in Ponce.
Thank you. Thank you to you both. And so now, without further ado, we're going to go on to our live stream video premiere of The Prince and the Pana. It was performed before a live audience on December 9th through 10th in 2023 here in Austin. So if you hear people laughing in the background or applauding, it's because it really was done in live, and you're going to enjoy the original story and also original music in Taino, bomba, plena, fusion, original music that we wrote for the Prince and the Pana. So I believe what's going to happen now is our wonderful technical administrator, David, is going to put some pause on this. Thank you, David, for all your help that made it possible. And he's going to probably flash something on the screen, and we will take a little 5-minute break so everyone can get some fresh water, and then we can watch our play. If something happens that this live stream gets disconnected, and we'll come right back in another stream with the play, so don't despair. So thank you. Besitos. Thank you so much.